Fine. Thank you for joining. So it is exactly 2 o'clock. Why don't we go ahead and start with our brief introduction, and I think other people will trickle in while we get started. So good morning, good afternoon, depending on where you are. Thank you for joining the Sharing Actions Call Africa call. This is our first call of 2024. We're so excited to be with you. This initiative started with the climate champions and our partners who are set forth below are the UN Economic Commission of Africa, FSD Africa, Climate Action Platform, the Kinawindow Advisory, Race to Zero, Race to Resilience, the Climate Capital Mobilization Accelerator, and our newest member, Ambition Loop. And so we're so excited to come to you today with these really established speakers who have a breadth of knowledge about the climate finance space. This particular platform has been set up to ensure that the information and the actions that are happening around climate finance in Africa are not siloed, that we are working together as a collaborative to move faster and to scale all of these wonderful initiatives. And so with that, I would like to just briefly introduce our speakers for today. Our first speaker will be Ambassador Mohamed Nasser. He is one of the experts who has been participating in the COP process for many years as a diplomat and a negotiator. He has been very instrumental in the process of the Loss and Damage Fund, which is what he will speak to us today about. And in the past, he has also been with the Egyptian Ministry of Foreign Affairs as counselor, Mission of Egypt to the UN, and other organizations in Geneva. Very honored to have him with us today. Our second speaker will be Ms. Fatin Agad, and she will bring us some insights about the opportunities that climate space has been evolving after COP28, specifically as a member of the African High-Level Panel of Experts on the reforms of the multilateral system. So we're really excited to see, next slide, Naira, please. We're really excited to see the developments in this space. There's been a lot of action, and she's a member of the African Climate Foundation, so it'll be really exciting to hear from her today as a representative, as a senior advisor who has also been a representative with relations to the EU. Our third speaker for today will be Ms. Angela Hamsi. And so this really all started around pipeline work and really having fundamental projects being financed in the climate space. And so Angela really brings that work to light in her Ignite Solar platform, where she has done a lot of innovative infratech work, climate finance space. And so we look forward to learning about the innovative funds and award-winning activity that she has been engaged in. And then finally, we will get to hear from one of our own climate champion team members, the nature finance lead, Ms. Puninda Tind. And Puninda has been charged with helping the climate champions and non-state actors really develop a strong nature finance agenda and really bring some solutions to the NBS space. So we're really looking forward to hearing what she's been up to and how she's collaborating across the various stakeholders to move forward sustainable strategies with us. So that is our roll up for today. We're so excited. And with that, I would like to kick it off with our Honorable Ambassador Nasser. Over to you, sir.
Thank you so much, and thank you so much for the invitation and for allowing me to be part and take part with this very distinguished panel and speakers. It is always an honor to engage with you, and it's always an effort that is much appreciated for the climate champions and other stakeholders. During our presidency and during COP27, we're very keen to upgrade and enhance this engagement, and knowing that stakeholders have a major role to play when it comes to adaptation, loss and damage, and others, compared to how the private sector would react when it comes to mitigation, especially on energy and others. So thank you again for this, and thank you for having me. My understanding that I'll be talking about the Loss and Damage Fund, but before that, let me also convey the greetings from the African Group of Negotiators, where we are meeting now here in Sharm el-Sheikh to assess the outcomes of COP28 and also strategize for the way forward during this year. We had a presentation this morning by Mariam, who is also works with the climate champions on the work of the champions on the Sharm el-Sheikh adaptation agenda, and of course discussions around the loss and damage fund. So again, thank you for that. Very quickly, if I would say generically on the outcomes of COP28, of course, a very important COP outcomes. On top of it would be like the GST and what is contained in the GST, specifically on fossil fuels and phasing down and phasing out of fossil fuels in the energy sector. That was a major landmark. And also the ability of the UAE as presidency to assist in mobilize finances for different funds, and specifically for the loss and damage fund, which has proven in the negotiations last year in the transition committee to be very challenging. This, of course, among others, in particular, also the global goal on adaptation, which was again another uphill fight that was taken forward by the African group and others. And I think the outcome at least put us on the right track to take it forward. I will speak on the loss and damage fund. It was, again, a historic agreement in Sharm in COP27 that we create the fund and the funding arrangements. So it is a two-component element. It is a fund and funding arrangements, and with a focus on delivering for the particularly vulnerable developing countries. Of course, the issue of vulnerability has always been a sticky point when it comes to discussing climate finance in general, or when it comes to loss and damage in particular. But I think it was very innovative in Sharm by parties, especially the G77, the leadership role of Pakistan in providing the right language that allowed us during the course of the year last year, when in the transitional committee setting the scene for how to operationalize the loss and damage fund, that we avoided, although it was very difficult fights, avoided this attempt by some to start splitting again developing countries on different bases. And the outcome of the transitional committee on the operationalization of the loss and damage fund and the funding arrangements was, I would say, the best compromise that we can get in a course of a year, a very condensed, tough, and heated discussions, especially in the last two meetings, the Aswan and then in Abu Dhabi, that allowed us to have the fund up and operational. We know that there were some concerns on the role of the World Bank there, but some of us who are members of the transitional committee have been doing the Green Climate Fund since its inception all the way until now, and do understand the challenges when you're creating a new fund. How does it take, and what elements should be in place to allow for funds to flow in? So the first part that was done by the transitional committee, which is first the safeguards, the eligibility, the structure of the fund, how it's going to function and deliver, I think were the best that we can, and I think they are very good. And then the second part, which again I give the credit for the UAE in mobilizing from different contributors, 700 plus million at the opening of the COP for the loss and damage fund. 2 points there. It's very important to highlight that even in the outcome of the transitional committee, two elements were missing there. One was the scale of the fund, and the second one was the sources of the funding. Generic sources, yes, but specific sources were missing there, and specific responsibilities were missing. But this is due to the realities on the ground when it comes to responsibility and when it comes to loss and damage discussions. So I think those were elements, together with the World Bank being the host of the fund, were of the challenging nature for some. But I think by the push by the EU and the amount of funds that are being promised to the loss and damage fund, I think this was a very good start. So where are we now with the operationalization? Of course, developing countries have provided their nominations to the board. Unfortunately, developed countries have not provided their nominations to the board yet. We don't know why, but there are different stories going around, including that they're still discussing how can they split the seats that are there. We are almost mid-February. Our expectation was to start moving, and the board starts acting as soon as possible. As you know, that in the recommendation of the transitional committee that was endorsed at the COP, was a two-stage or three-stage process for the loss and damage fund when in its engagement with the World Bank. The first one is in the first year, where we succeeded in securing the legal personality of the loss and damage fund. So it is not a fifth that is under the World Bank, but it is a fund that is hosted by the World Bank. And by that, there is a host country that will host the board and that will give it the legal personality. This is something that we have, I think there are several expression of interest by countries on that. And the second part was the work of the specific policies that are different than the normal FIFs or FIFs that the World Bank hosts. And those relates to issues of eligibility, relates to the issue of reporting and the role of the COP and the CMA and the authority, and where the kind of independence of the loss and damage fund. This second part needs further discussion and negotiations between the board once it's functional and the World Bank team to go through during this year the different requirements. I think there were more than 12 requirements that were put in place, including on the instruments, including on the accessibility, including on the eligibility, including on the the legal personality of the board and the linkage between the board and the World Bank board. And those are elements that will have to be discussed with the World Bank. And at the end of the year, if they are in place, then the first vision or the option one that is put forward by the TC will materialize. It will be there. And then in 3 years' time, we'll have an assessment of the functioning of this fund in coordination or with the support of the World Bank. If they are not there, then we'll shift to the option two, which was a strong call by many independent and civil society experts that to create an independent fund similar to the Green Climate Fund with all what it takes to operationalize it. But there was a clear understanding in the TC towards the end that there is a willingness at the World Bank and there is an interest that the World Bank can really move around in its new vision on climate, that it can provide the needed flexibilities and it will be able to comply with the requirements coming in the decision or the recommendations from the transitional committee. So where we are now, we have $750 million pledged, including pledging from the UAE of 100 million, which is the first, that was the first one. And it really allowed others to jump in. Of course, them and Germany were the first to come in and pledge, and then other countries came forward. Of course, countries like the UK, of course, many countries in the European Union, all of them came forward. Even the US came forward with a small amount of money, but at least they also pledged to the loss and damage fund, which was a very good step in itself. So with that, I think the fund has all the ingredients to start working and working on the triggers that would allow the fund to start providing and dispersing to the particularly vulnerable countries. It was identified three main levels of work of the fund. One is enhancing, working on the enhancing the resilience before a crisis happens. And another one is really working the day after the crisis happened, so ensure the sustainability of livelihoods. And the third one was on the long-term building back better approach, which allows for concessional funding for countries to rebuild or regain its lost economic development due to climate-related disasters. So this is where we are when it comes to the loss and damage fund. I'll stop there. Of course, other comments on the other outcomes of the UAE COP. It was very positive step forward with the discussion on fossil fuels. Now it's time for implementation. And the tripling of renewable energy and doubling of energy efficiency was again a very good step forward. Again, the question stands at the end of the day. Where can we get the resources? What kind of scale is available? Are we really delivering when it comes to delivering the support packages to achieve those targets? I think this year in the discussion building up to the NCQG will give us this kind of assurances. We hope that between the UAE and Azerbaijan, we'll get like a real push to have a very interesting and hopefully ambitious outcome like what we had in the UAE and before that, starting from the implementation phase that started in Glasgow, and I see Nigel is here, from Glasgow to Sharm el-Sheikh to the UAE. The whole discussion under the climate change regime now is shifting from rule books and rules into implementation focus. And I think it's becoming very challenging, but also very attractive to everybody. I'll stop there. I spoke a lot, and thank you so much again for the invitation. Back to you.
Thank you so much, Ambassador. I don't know if there are any immediate questions. I don't see any hands right now, so we'll move on to the next speaker and we'll come back to the end. And if people have questions, please do feel free to drop them in the chat.
I see Nigel's hand is going up. I don't see that.
Nigel, please.
Yeah, Mo, first of all, thank you for joining. And we should congratulate you on the very successful completion of the Egyptian presidency, which only finished a couple of months ago, right? So really amazing job, and especially on mobilizing the progress so far. And I know it's only a beginning. I had two questions. I wondered if you could comment on. I just posted a couple of things in the chat. One, I saw with great interest the Kenyan and French governments launched this tax task force. I think based on the observation that we've really struggled to get the 100 billion, trying to squeeze the same sources for 200 billion seems like we maybe need to do that and look for new sources. So I wondered if you had any observations on that tax task force and if you think it's got any momentum. And then I've also seen some interesting work from some of the insurance industry looking at mechanisms to use the limited funds for maximum support. And again, I don't know if you've seen that work that was published recently by Howden from Cambridge. I wondered if you have any thoughts about mechanisms that use some sort of insurance type pooling of risk to get more coverage for loss and damage than if it's just a one-for-one.
Thank you so much, Nigel. And on the first one, well, have been doing climate finance since 2009, and fortunately or unfortunately, have seen several similar task forces that happened, including one that was led by the late Prime Minister of Ethiopia, and I think also by the UK, that was thinking of carbon taxation that will bring the 100 billion. The problem with all of this is that they are very good from the academic point of view and on paper. Once you start implementing, then you face a lot of different realities. Similar to the idea when we came in the loss and damage fund discussion, it was a standalone fund and everybody was focusing on that. But based on the experience that we had with the GCF, the creation of the GCF and operationalization of the GCF, this will take us 6-7 years and we'll never get it right. And we'll continue on too many things. So the task force in itself is good to identify the potential sources and see their feasibility. But then when it comes to implementation, it will be like a big question, even including the levies on shipping, for example. Each sector will be like very protective of the resources that they have because they have obligations to deliver on. And then if we use the existing pots, and which I strongly recommend, and not create new ones, I think that will be makes more sense. But still, people always think of creating a new fund to have more funds, and this is not a reflection of the urgency that is needed as per Glasgow, as per science, as per Sharm, as per UAE. So, but it is a good attempt, and hopefully it will be able to identify newer ideas when it comes to climate finance. On the other one was, sorry, I missed. The other question was on.
It just some work I've seen looking at how to provide more coverage for loss and damage by using more of a pooled risk approach rather than a one-for-one.
Yes. This was clearly discussed and is part of the second outcome, which is the funding arrangements.
Okay.
And the fund itself, when it functions, it will not work on only the fund providing direct funding to, especially when it comes to building back or resilience. It will complement and contribute to other funds. So the leveraging idea is already there, and
Great.
it is. Nobody knows that. Let's be realistic. Will you be able to have a fund of 100 billion or 200 billion? The World Bank itself does not have this much money. But the idea of how can we use the limited resources to either leverage or complement is the one that was kind of there, including by covering the needed part to make the funding very concessional, which was one of the ideas, that how can the fund just contribute to reduce the cost and make it concessional, which was one of the goals. So yes, the idea is there to complement and not just one-on-one thing. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Mo.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Thank you, Nigel. And thank you, Ambassador, again for joining us. And just to note, I do wanted to mention John Paul Adam, who was supposed to join us today, unfortunately had a personal emergency and was not able to join us, but he did send his greetings to everyone, and he will likely be able to join us on the next call. So thank you, Jean-Paul, for your continued support of this initiative. And with that, we will move on to our second guest for the day, Ms. Fatin Agad. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Jacinda. Good afternoon, good morning, wherever you are. Yeah, lovely to be able to join, and thanks for the team for having included me. Perhaps just a correction, Jacinda, if you'd allow me. I'm here strictly as a panel member. I'm not affiliated with another organization. So I've been asked to reflect a bit about the outcome of the COP28 and what does it mean for the development drive on the African continent. I think just picking up as well on the points that Ambassador Nasser just mentioned in terms of the successes of the COP28. I think certainly the Loss and Damage Fund, and I think we congratulate the UAE, but I think credit also needs to be given to the COP27 presidency. I do remember a lot of people were extremely skeptical just ahead of COP27, and the presidency pushed through to at least pave the way for the outcome that we got at COP28. So I think fantastic dual presidency outcome there, and hopefully that a lot of the challenges that Ambassador Nasser also highlighted will be overcome sooner rather than later, considering the urgency. I think from the African point of view, I think looking also at the GST outcome, there are quite a number of elements that reflect and reinforce some of the elements of the African position. I won't go through them, but I wanted particularly to highlight the recognition of national circumstances and the fact that the different regions and countries will inevitably peak at different times, and we need to recognize that development, the right to development, so to speak, even though it's put in different words. Certainly, the outcome around fossil fuels is welcome. I think many across the continent have welcomed it. I think the challenge now is how do we make sure that we're able to deliver that in two ways. One's in terms of the responsibility of the countries and regions where, in fact, most of the fossil fuel expansion will happen between now and 2050. Many of them are not developing countries. So how do we really secure results for the delivery of that particular outcome across the board? And secondly, is the pragmatism and that also Ambassador Nasser was highlighting. How are we going to implement all of this? Speaking to many actors across the African continent, I think there's a clear recognition that the world economy is moving towards a decarbonized system, that that because of the climate impact on the continent, we will need to move towards that decarbonized system. But how do we scale up the deployment of renewable energy on the continent? I think that's and where will the financing come from? I'll come back to that particular point later on. There were also, I think, some welcome discussions, although I would say that they fell short in terms of ambition. One of them is around finance. Very little progress in terms of concretely how do we move forward with that. I'm very cognizant of the fact that a lot of discussions are happening outside of the COP context. We're dealing with the multiple processes around the reforms of the global financial architecture, World Bank roadmap, World Bank Group roadmap, etc. But it would have been nice to see, for example, a bit more concrete commitments, for example, around the debt. that I felt was something that was hanging over the COP28, but with very little engagement in terms of how are we going to move forward, how can we guarantee, how can we support from a climate perspective a commitment to engage with the debt situation, for example, in the African continent, although we're not the only one. That being said, I do feel that one particularly positive outcome of this COP was that it refocused the attention again on public finance. If I look at the GST document, it mentions private sector only in 2 spots, and it mentions it in terms of its role as a partner, not its role as a key carrier of financial obligations. And I think the experience over the last few years has shown that public finance remains, I think, certainly for developing regions, it remains a very important source. I think that needs to be promoted. We need to continue thinking innovatively about how do we scale up that public finance, concessional public finance. So it really felt that this was positive. The other point where I felt that the COP28 flirted a bit with the subject matter, but without necessarily diving deeper, is putting back the issue of around trade on the table. Of course, the issue around trade, including the wording that's in the GST text currently, is drawn from the Convention of '92. So textually, as such, there's very little progress. But I think in terms of agenda setting, in terms of finding a way to put an issue that is increasingly becoming important and of concern to certainly to several African countries, is useful. We're seeing a mushrooming of climate labeled trade measures that from the studies that are available would have negative repercussions on regions such as Africa. And so we will need to go and think a bit more creatively about how do we resolve that, you know, in the spirit of really trying to push an ambitious climate agenda that one ensures an appropriate emission reduction, but also one that sustains a trust in the system. And on this point, I just wanted to again link this or rather go back to this question of implementation. I think besides the formal text, I think I just wanted to flag a couple of initiatives which I feel again get us closer in terms of starting a more proper practical conversation in terms of what we or how do we move forward. I think the first one is the initiative around the Accelerated Partnership for Africa's for renewables, renewable energy in Africa. Several African countries took part in that with the support from IRENA, Norway, Germany. And I think that provides a very concrete platform for us to have a discussion in terms of, one, what kind of financing is required, what scale are we talking about, two, the capacity support that is needed. The truth of the matter is that, you know, even if the funding flows, it will need to land in a certain policy context that balances the needs of the investors together with the developmental ambitions of the country, etc. And so this is, for example, an initiative that helps bring that together. But I do feel, again, to take me back to the question of trade, I think when we speak of financing initiatives such as these around the scale up of renewable energy, we need to look beyond the straitjacket, I would say, of the financing discussion. What I mean by that is that often the discussion has been very focused on how much investments can we attract. very little was done, and very little reflection and conversations have taken place in terms of what is the kind of enabling environment that we need to actually help unlock this financing. And to take the case of renewables, for example, very specifically, many would again go back to the question of off-takers, be it investors from Europe, be it investors from China, looking into Africa. The question of off-take is important, be it of renewable energy, albeit of a green product that can then generate revenue for the countries. And we need to start looking at ways of leveraging trade for finance. And that conversation hasn't, I feel, is not yet mature. If we can get a situation where there is a global framework that would, for example, incentivize offtake from particular regions that are struggling with finance, it would create a certain market attractiveness in investment in those parts of the world. Related to this is also the African Green Industrialization Initiative. Again, you know, in the African continent, the entire transition agenda is really linked to development agenda. And that development agenda in Africa, for it to deliver, will need to move beyond you know, the extraction, and we're still faced with, you know, how do we finance that process? And so injecting also in the discussion this issue of industrialization, as has been done just now with the COP28, building on a pre-existing initiative of $4.5 billion by the UAE. We're again trying to find the economic case for the transition that would help ease some of the and actually open opportunities, I think, for countries that are concerned on dependence on financial handouts, almost, I would say. But that being said, and just to conclude, I think it's not a situation of either or. I think there are certain international obligations based on historical ambitions, historical responsibilities, and at the same time, the scale of the need is so gigantic that we will need to go and explore all routes. So how do we do it concretely? And again, implementation being at the center of it. I think as we move to COP29 and even more so to COP30, I hope that some of the new approaches on how we discuss questions around finance, how do we raise finance, are brought into the discussion. Thank you very much, Jacinda.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Fatin. And we'll go quickly to the ambassador for one question. He has his hand. Thank you.
Thank you so much, and thank you so much, Fatin. And it's more of like a question than a comment. I fully agree with Fatin. I mean, the problem now is not at the level of ambition, but on the implementation side. Because one thing that we knew when we were in Sharm el-Sheikh is that developing countries were asked so many times to prepare so many plans and strategies. And they do that, and they get funded to prepare the plans and strategies, and then they struggle to find funding to implement them. We have seen it in the NAPAs, in the NAPs, in the low emission development plans, blah, 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 blah. And now the concern that some of the concern that we saw in the UAE was a focus on the NDC2 and not focusing on delivering on the NDC1. And a strong push to expand on the NDC2 while NDC1 is still sitting and struggling to be implemented. So this is the first point, and I think we are hoping that part of the outcome on Dubai was to highlight that implementation for NDC1 has to, including snaps, has to be delivered by 2030 as part of the NCQG. The second one, there's another side of the trade thing, and I think what was clear in the UAE is that the new trend of the CBAMs and CBAM likes, the carbon border adjustment measures, which is popping up now, is not, it has two sides. One, it is pushing for greening, yes, but on the other side, it is pushing for greening without any resources for those who should green. And there is a dilemma, and this dilemma might have an impact even in the coming COP, because it is a big thing for developing countries. They are facing now obstacles that has not WTO compatible, that has nothing to do with their ability, but it is really restricting them. So if the whole system is not put in place together as one big puzzle or elements that will work together, then I think in a couple of years' time, this whole system will be in question. And this is a matter of concern for many, specifically for those who are most impacted, like the African continent. Just wanted to say that, and thank you.
Okay, I think quickly, Hanan, we'll take your question as well, and then we'll move on to the next speaker. Hanan, you're on mute. Okay.
Can you hear me?
Oh, there she is. Yes, we can hear you
Can
now.
you hear me? Sorry, I'm just taking the call from the mobile. It's hard to figure it out. So I agree with Faten as well, and I think it's one of the things that we faced at COP28, despite that this was the first time to be bringing the trade as a trade day and on board, but the WTO as well has a bigger role to play than just what they are doing now. They have a very limited scope, which we believe that needs to be widened as well. And 100% agreeing as well on the greening the demand via offtake agreements. And it's not just for the countries as well, but it's very essential for the private sector and the transition of the private sector if they are as well operating in jurisdictions outside of the EU, where you don't have the CBAM and you don't have these mandatory regulations, and it's purely on voluntary basis. It's very important when we're pushing for greening the supply and the transitioning of the emerging markets economies who are particularly expert of oil and gas, that we as well push for greening the demand via contracts and long-term offtake agreements. Otherwise, we wouldn't have the right ecosystem whereby those companies before the countries that they can transition as well based on the commercial type of dialogue. So I completely agree with Faten as well.
Faten, any last comments before?
No, nothing for now, Jacinda. I think, yeah, fantastic additions. Just as Hanan also was talking, I mean, I only mentioned a few things in terms of the finance agenda, you know, including debt, including how can we stimulate financing through offtake. But I think there's also quite a lot to be done in terms of, for example, the impact of ESG standards in some parts of the world and what they do to the cost of the investment, for example, in regions in Africa where governments may not have the same standard, and that is done without necessarily the right capacity having been deployed, etc. So I think Ambassador Nasser put it very well. I think we've been, and certainly I feel on the question of finance, been very straitjacketed in one lane, and I think it's which I think is useful. But I think we need to start looking more and more at things in a through a system approach, because if countries are going to get access to finance, I mean, the CBAM was mentioned. The CBAM is forecasted to lead to a loss of $25 billion per annum to the African continent. That is a huge amount. And so if we are raising 25 billion in climate finance, and on the other hand, we're getting the loss of 25 billion because of climate measures, I think it should really get us to think a bit more on how do we mitigate these risks better, and rather, whatever comes is additional rather than a substitute to other losses.
No, great point. Thank you so much. I think we'll have to expand on that on another call, maybe on these offtake agreements and the African Green Industrialization Initiative. So, but with that, I'm excited to introduce Angela Hamzy, who will talk about Ignite Solar and her outcomes since COP28 Africa.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Jacinda, for having me today. So first, let me tell you just a couple of a word about Ignite and what we do. We are an infratech platform, which is championing like nation scale, decarbonized and distributed infrastructure. So what we do clearly is like we develop and we execute quite large scale deployments of distributed solar power, distributed solar internet and solar irrigation in the countries where we operate across sub-Saharan Africa. We're using a suite of proprietary technologies that we've developed in-house over the last 10 years or so that makes our project able to deploy these vast numbers of distributed power generations and solar internet units in a way that is highly digitized, fully transparent, and enabled basically to incorporate all the different elements of really deploying effectively and monitoring effectively as well those large projects for us and for our stakeholder. Stakeholder being working with the local governments in the country where you operate in a model that we call a PPMP. It's a private-public multilateral partnership. We work very closely as amazing partners and big enabler with the World Bank, but as well with many other different partners, both private sectors and public sectors across our project. Today, we've in about 10 countries, I said. We're in over 20,000 locations, and we've reached about 2.5 million people. So in the definition, I think, of the bios that you mentioned earlier, you said award-winning, which is an important topic for today specifically, because we were extremely, extremely proud to receive on the first night of COP28 the Zayed Sustainability Prize for energy. It's a fabulous recognition from the UAE, and we're all the more delighted for that prize. We won other prizes in the past, which we are extremely grateful for as well. But I think that this prize, particularly coming at the beginning of COP28 and from the UAE, for us was really setting the tone of those couple of weeks, which were pretty spectacular for us, but I think as well pretty important for renewable energy and emerging markets. In the way that the UAE, I think, has really championed not only some of the vision of what we need to do, but as well enabling very pragmatic cooperation between all the key stakeholders, and as well a spirit of execution. Just to mention a couple other initiatives as well that were launched at COP that I think that we believe are very important for the future. What we do is first we managed to close and sign the first, as much as we know, and then very innovative forward carbon deal for our market, which was together with a large private sector entity on the other side. And that was for operating in several countries in West Africa, but potentially expanding further afield. The second part is we won another award actually from our friend at Convergence Blended Capital and CPI, which is a climate policy initiative based out of the US, Washington, D.C. And that prize was for an initiative that we've put forward around catalytic climate finance. Why do I think this is very important in particular? That initiative is called the Climate Credit Enhancement Facility. Why is it very important? Because really it made me thought obviously about at COP27 back in Sharm, I had my former chairman and obviously someone that everybody knows here, the Vice President Al Gore, former Vice President Al Gore, doing a fantastic speech where he highlighted over there that we're all very, very eager for that loss and damage fund. Obviously, we're all very eager for more government support for what we're trying to do. But at the end of the day, we're talking here about billions, maybe tens of billions, great scenario, maybe 100 billion. And that's very important. That's extremely important. But what's needed is 4.5 trillion per year for the transition. And that only can come from unlocking proper private capital. And when I say proper private capital, I mean, not only a very important part of capital, which is impact capital or some very high risk capital, which plays a very important role, but that doesn't reach the scale that we need or the cost of capital that we need. If you look in the US, 96% of renewable energy is financed from private market and only 4% from government. If you look at Africa, the latest data that I had was that about only 14% is from the private capital sources, and 86% is from government. And that's not even, I'm not even mentioning that it's obviously different amounts that we're comparing here, with much lower amounts still today in emerging markets and in Africa. And one of the reasons being, which is something that we're working on, is the cost of capital, the interest rates on big project and on distributed project, which are 7 or 10 times higher than what you would get in OECD countries. So just to say a word about this facility that we're putting together, and which, the goal of it really is we want to bring the field of emerging market distributed renewable energy, which is, again, we focus on distributed decarbonized infrastructure. We want to bring it to the world of infrastructure in a way that it can really be financed by large-scale pension fund, institutional capital, infrastructure funds, right? The very large infrastructure funds, which so far they're not dipping their toes into that field, which is, I think, one of the key solution, not only for Africa, by the way. I think it's a key solution for Africa because we have issues around transmissions and so forth. But I think it's a key solution for the rest of the world. And Africa is doing another instance of leapfrogging here and in bringing that first out of necessity. But eventually you'll see it in California, in the UK and elsewhere. And I think this distributed renewable energy has a lot of potential if we bring the right capital behind it. So with that facility, what we're doing is we're trying to get together like this kind of like a spirit of radical collaboration between the different stakeholders with a set of blended finance, but a bit different from the blended finance that we've seen in the past, in the sense that it was very often backing capital provider directly, and that created a lot of issues in actually the capital trickling down to really to the ground and to the field. I mean, there's a lot of great announcements, a lot of great big fund, but what really trickled down to the actual project on the ground is apparently a few percentage points only from data that I've seen. So how do you unlock that is by getting that blended finance to not address directly the banking needs, but actually the project needs. How do you work at the project level to make sure that this, renewable energy project distributed for us, but renewable energy project in general, really make the cut in being able to attract directly the large infrastructure and institutional player out there. So we're structuring that facility, which we really think will bring us from a bit of a vicious circle that we've been facing, because there's a lot of entrepreneurs, developers, people trying to do project, and they struggle to get them financed with the right economics. And because they've struggled with that, they get very high cost of capital, which makes the project pretty much unsustainable to a large extent. Sometimes end up giving prices to the end clients and the power level and the power distribution that are completely charging a very large poverty premium. That's true for the internet, that's true for the power and many different areas. And we need to unlock that vicious circle, because then it feeds into defaults or failed project that don't close, and then that circle continues. So how do you unlock that is exactly by making sure that you secure the cash flow stream in the way that they will really be bankable, in a way that you don't need to pay very exorbitant cost of capital. By doing that, you can actually have unit economics at the project level that will fight part of the poverty premium that we're talking about in terms of the cost of electricity on those distributed renewable energy projects. And that will create a virtuous circle around it, because it will feed through as you get the data, the credit data, as you get the projects that are closing, that get good economics, that have lower defaults, that would feed the right type of data to then attract this institutional capital in a way that is permanent and not just supported by blended finance. And that's something that's very important that we discussed a lot at COP28. And I have to say that when we were there, we participated in, we were supposed to participate in 10 panels or so. With the Zayed Prize, it became maybe 30 of them. So it was a very busy week. But what we saw is that there was a lot of partners that were ready to really make that jump with those right fundamental, from funds that manage trillions of dollars that we talked to, international fund that match, which usually never came into that market before, that were really receptive, as well as technology. I mean, Google is a fantastic company that we work with, that has been supporting our work in many different respects, for example. But as well, working with the US government has been very interesting, because although maybe they were smaller, I think was mentioned earlier in the loss and damage, I think they're doing a lot to support private sector approach to those problems. And we were doing the closing event of the US Center around that very topic. They're doing it in a very big way at home in the US, obviously with the Inflation Reduction Act, but I think they've been as well promoting quite a few international initiatives, party one was the UAE government, which obviously we're sitting between the UAE and there, which is the PACE program, which we really look forward as well to being operationals and to making an impact on renewable energy in the region here. So just all that to say that, COP28 for us was a very positive movement in terms of like really seeing a lot of partners wanted to move to execution. And we just hope that throughout the presidency this year, this will actually happen. And that's, really what we're watching for now.
Thank you so much, Angela. That was very, very insightful and very helpful. And we definitely look forward to supporting and advocating for the fund and anything that we can do to support. And I think everyone on the call should also, feel that urge that, as you engage in renewable energy space, please reach out to Angela if it makes sense and work with her on these different initiatives. I don't see any hands right now, so I think we can move on to our next speaker. So thank you very much, Angela. And our next speaker will be Puninda Tind. Puninda, thanks for joining. Welcome to Sharing Actions.
Thanks so much, Jacinda, and hi, everyone. Pleasure to join you all here today. Thank you so much for having me. I'll speak briefly about some of the nature of finance outcomes from COP28 and how we plan to drive these forward, very much echoing the messages of the previous speakers around the need for systems level change, focusing on implementation this year and catalyzing and the importance of catalyzing new and additional finance. Her Excellency Razan Al Mubarak and Dr. Mahmoud Mohideen, the high-level champions for COP28 and COP27, respectively, have been very supportive and leading on the nature and finance agendas, respectively. And great to have also Nigel on the call as well, as a former high-level climate champion, really, built the stage for mainstreaming nature on the climate agenda. And this COP28 acknowledged nature's role in safeguarding us from climate change, not just on the mitigation side, but also adaptation. And so I'll speak about some of the key outcomes and noting that this list is not exhaustive. So nature was placed at the heart of the global stocktake with a strong call for halting and reversing deforestation and forest degradation by 2030, and acknowledgement of the implementation of integrated multi-sectoral solutions such as land use management, resilient food systems, nature-based solutions, and ecosystem-based approaches, including a reference to the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework. And in addition to this joint statement on climate, nature, and people that was launched at COP28 also called for stronger synergies between the upcoming round of the nationally determined contributions, the NDCs, the updated national adaptation plans, and the forthcoming national biodiversity strategies and action plans. And so this acknowledgement of synergies with the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework and enhanced cooperation really reinforces the need for enhanced support and investment as well. We also saw 2.6 billion in nature conservation finance announced for forest and land for specific countries, including Ghana, Indonesia, Papua New Guinea, Democratic Republic of Congo, and Republic of Congo. And so from a climate champions perspective and the ecosystem of partners, we stand ready to support non-state actor engagement towards the development and implementation of these packages, and are keen to see how the delivery moves forward over the upcoming years. We also saw for the first time at a head of state level at the World Climate Action Summit, ocean, mangrove, coral, and seagrass given significant attention as key ecosystems for climate action. So 49 countries in partnership with over 50 non-state actors are now supporting the mangrove breakthrough targets to restore and protect 15 million hectares of mangroves and to halt mangrove destruction by 2030. And we know we need to mobilize $4 billion by 2030 around mangrove restoration and conservation. So this year we hope to work with partners to focus on closing some of those mangrove financing deals and really showcasing what are the blueprints between philanthropic, private, and public sector capital that can actually mobilize capital at scale for these deals. We also saw momentum from non-state actors, including finance sector on nature. So some of the initiatives that I'll mention here are the convergence of MDBs and DFIs and other international organizations that launched a task force to boost sustainability-linked sovereign financing for nature and climate. As Angela mentioned, risk mitigation and credit enhancement solutions like guarantees can catalyze private sector investment at scale. And so this task force really aims to support the issuance of sustainability performance-linked sovereign debt instruments and aiming to create fiscal space for countries that are on the forefront of the climate crisis to catalyze capital for addressing climate and nature initiatives. And in addition to this, we also mobilized and saw mobilization of businesses and financial institutions that are starting to put nature at the heart of their climate strategies. So as part of a broader Nature Positive for Climate Action campaign, we mobilized over 150 businesses and financial institutions towards this effort. These organizations are addressing deforestation risk, starting to include nature in their climate transition plans, adopting science-based targets for nature, and adopting disclosures on nature-related, the task force on nature-related financial disclosures. So we'll continue to drive this effort forward this year towards the CBD COP16 and COP29 to further the climate-nature nexus by increasing the number of businesses and financial institutions that are driving this campaign, while also focusing on capacity building across different regions on the topic of nature. And so we hope to work with partners across the ecosystem on doubling down on specifically the deforestation agenda, as well as on mobilizing and scaling finance for bankable nature-based solutions projects. The next thing I'll mention, which is very much related and relevant, is that COP28 also firmly put food systems on the climate agenda. So alongside the UAE Declaration on Sustainable Agriculture, we had the non-state actor call to action for transforming food systems, which was endorsed by over 200 diverse set of non-state actors, including farmers organizations, indigenous peoples organizations, businesses, financial institutions, and youth networks. And so the call to action really outlines 10 priority actions that these non-state actors have committed to. And the focus this year and lead up to COP30, really looking at it from a 2-year arc, is to really catalyze action and enable radical collaboration among these non-state actors as well. And so really summarizing in terms of this year, we really hope to work with partners to really strengthen the nature-climate nexus. And one of the key aspects of that is also bringing together the nature and adaptation finance ecosystems. Some of the negotiated and non-negotiated outcomes at COP28 show that both nature finance and adaptation and resilience finance are picking up momentum, but they're rarely interconnected beyond just surface level mentions. And so specifically for countries in the global south, this is this interlinkage is very important, as nature-based solutions provide key co-benefits for adaptation. So this year is the year of implementation and delivery, and also the year of the 3 Rio Conventions. And so we're very much looking forward to enabling action with non-state actors as we drive delivery and implementation of these efforts moving forward. So I'll pause there.
Awesome. So much information. Thank you, Pernilla. You always have the scoop on the nature-based solution. So thank you for sharing with us today. And I would love to introduce one of our core team members. Her name is Jane Lumumba. She's our Africa Director. She will be handling our question Q&A session for today. So with that, Jane, over to you.
Thank you very much, Jacinda, and thank you very much to all the speakers that have gone ahead. We are honored to have you on this call, and thank you very much for your insights. I do see that we have a bit of time for question and answer. So why don't we take 3 questions and then we can address them. And then if there are other questions, we can follow up that way. But before we take the 3 questions, and please do raise your hand so that I can see, I want to pick up a question by Boyega Olurunfemi. he was addressing this question to the ambassador. Do you think that the new collective quantified goal on climate finance will deliver on the broken promise of the 100 billion USD in line with Nigel's curiosity? So Ambassador, if you can recall Nigel's curiosity, please do have a response. But before you respond, let us take 2 more questions from the floor, and then we'll have the responses. Any questions? Or comments? Okay, while I wait for hands to go up, please, Ambassador, the floor is yours on Boyega's question. Is the ambassador still with us?
And honestly, Jean, I think we can maybe put that question to the panel, if anyone on the panel wanted to.
No
Maybe
problem. Faten, Angela, or Puninda, please. Okay. Faten, do you mind?
Looks like Puninda is trying to unmute.
Yeah?
So there.
Okay, good. Puninda, please go ahead.
Sorry, yeah, I just wanted to add, I don't know if I can do full justice to this question, but I think it would be interesting to see from our perspective the extent to which private sector expertise is kind of included in those negotiations. As we know, the first NCQG, didn't necessarily specify, whether the 100 billion was coming from all sources or public versus private sources. So I think it would be interesting to see to what extent that sort of differentiation is made in the negotiations moving forward, and also building trust in the system as well, and learning from that process and how we can enable that and bring forth private sector expertise and the role of the private sector to really unlock new and additional finance. So it'd be curious to see how that process kind of moves forward in terms of learning from what has been and has not been delivered with the 100 billion, and how we can further catalyze additional capital. So I think the conversation around new and additional capital and the role of the private sector in this would be very key in driving this effort forward.
Thank you very much. And I see that the ambassador has just joined. So Ambassador, please, the floor is yours. Boyega was asking, what do you think about the new collective quantified goal on climate finance will deliver on the broken promise of the 100 billion USD in line with Nigel's curiosity?
Hello, everyone. This is Maria, the personal assistant. He's back to the AGN meeting, and I will follow him this question. He might be back in a few minutes.
No problem. We understand, Maria. Jane, I did have one thing that I wanted to mention. One of our speakers, Catherine Kaufman, unfortunately had a last-minute clash, but what she was going to raise this afternoon was the Climate Capital Mobilization Accelerator, and the new partnership that we're working on with the Champions, with Ambition Loop, with UNECA, with GFANZ Africa, with the African Development Bank, the African Financial Alliance for Climate, and then we're also reaching out to ENCA to see if they also would like to work with us on this. But the main focus is around many of the issues that were raised today that have been surfaced at COP28, that were surfaced through the Climate Champions Finance Regional Forums. And those issues relate to the international financial architecture and the work that can be done to what we call revise the rules of the game in a way that will unlock more capital. So that work, along with the work of an accelerator, which directly goes to a more tactical approach of pipeline work. And what all of the speakers have kind of aligned on is that the capital is there in some way, shape, or form, but either there's no landing pad in that the projects are not investable for some reason or another, or that the finance is, like you said, kind of locked up in a system that makes it very difficult to access. And so part of the pipeline work that the accelerator intends to engage in has to do with, one, addressing those blocks, those issues that are creating the blockages, and also working directly with investable opportunities, whether they be project developers or corporations and industries who are looking to green their businesses, and connecting them with investors, funds, innovative funding structures, and innovating financing that's out there, focusing mainly on nature-based solutions to start, but we've also done a lot of work in renewable energy, which will also continue in other areas. But we do think that NBS is probably the most nascent of the pipeline areas. And so we really want to put a lot of energy and focus on building that pipeline, building the capacity of the project developers, governments, and other stakeholders who want to engage in that pipeline process or engage in climate finance activities. And then providing not only support for the beginning phases, but kind of through the different phases of the finance structure, as these projects are at different phases and with different capacities. So we would love for all of our partner networks to engage with us around the Climate Capital Mobilization Accelerator. We're looking for opportunities to really advocate for the changes that all of our speakers highlighted are necessary, and mainly through implementation and actually bringing dollars to the projects and to the people who need it most. So Jane, I just wanted to add that intervention as Catherine wasn't able to join us due to the conflict, but I think it's a really important opportunity for us to all really work together and collaborate around unlocking this climate finance flow.
Thanks, Jacinda. I'm just trying to read the chat to see if Jamie, do you want to share your comment or question?
It's not directly relevant to what was just said. It's just an FYI, sharing in the web chat. I'm happy to speak to it, but I don't want to break the flow, and I've also only just joined, so I don't know what the story
please
is.
break the flow, Jamie. Break the flow. This is an interactive
so
talk.
obviously, I'm sure you've covered this already. There's a G20 finance ministers meeting in 2 weeks, and so just curious about how everyone's interested in the strategic use of Africa's voice now it's arriving on the G20 platform. And so at least for our part, a few partners are putting together a letter, a very short top line letter to the G20 finance ministers from partners around the world. And we just want to make sure it's boosting and backing the African position. The letter, I should say, is quite focused on the public finance side of things rather than the private finance side of things. So it's just that's like a strategic point. Anyway, I'll share, Jacinda, I'll send you the draft and you can share it with key partners for comment. The only rule is it can't be more than a page. So any additional words require a reduction. So please engage with that if you're interested. Thank you.
Thank you, Jamie. Does anyone else have anything that they would like to add while we're sharing our actions? Jane, did you want to mention any of the climate champions? I know maybe you just want to drop the headlines of your focus for this year so that people who are engaging with you and your team have an idea of which direction we're going, and then I think we can probably wrap up.
No problem. Thank you very much, Jacinda. If there are no questions, I'll do share. So this year, of course, we have discussed coming out of COP28, sort of the headline call to action, the headline pledges. But this year, the Africa team is taking a systems approach to supporting non-state action, climate action in the continent. And we're going to be focusing on 4 pillars this year. One is on energy. And I won't go deeply into them, but I'll sort of highlight the key elements that we'll be focusing on. Of course, we'll be continuing with our work on the green hydrogen, supporting the Africa Green Hydrogen Alliance. Will this year, for those of you that were COP, clean cooking really got spotlighted and had a very big moment at COP. And we are working alongside a Clean Cooking Alliance and the African Development Bank, and I see functions at the line, to elevate non-state actor action within the clean cooking ecosystem and to really ensure that we unlock the right amount of finance in the right way. And then we are also, of course, working with Puninda and her team on nature, particularly around peatlands and grasslands, and also food systems transformation. We'll be working together with various partners on elevating neglected and underutilized species as a key vehicle for food systems transformation. Then again, we are focusing on resilient cities. Urbanization is really a key development lever for African nations. This is a continent that is urbanizing the fastest, and not only focusing on mega cities, but also secondary and medium cities as well, really ensuring that we have an African positions at CHAMP and the buildings breakthrough. And of course, taking a systems approach and really looking at a multi-sectoral approach where we are also working with informal transport, with the nature, with buildings, and really looking at the city ecosystem to drive climate action and really ensuring that we have a strong African position as we head on to COP29 and to COP30. And lastly, of course, focusing on climate finance, which we've been discussing on the Sharing Africa calls, really, again, supporting our GFANS Africa, supporting ACME, supporting all our partners that we've been working on over the last couple of years and months to ensure that we'll unlock the needed finance for Africa. I'll stop there because I would really use an hour to share what we'll be doing over the next year at the Africa team. But if you're interested, please do get in touch and we'll share those elements with everyone on the call. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Jane. And so with that, I really want to thank everyone for participating on the call today. We all know how important it is to align and collaborate and to share information in order to address this transition in a just, fair, financed way, and to ensure that we're all reaching the tactical and operational targets that we need to be in order to actually see the implementation. So we look forward to continuing to work with all of you, our partners for this call. Again, we thank CAP-A, we thank the UNECA, we thank Climate Champions, we thank Ambition Loop, and we look forward to, I think, CAP-A. And we're really excited about this year. Our next session will be in April. In the meantime, in case you're interested, we will be launching Sharing Actions LATAM calls for our Latin American base, and make sure that we're linking up in the South to South collaboration, learning from each other. A lot of the experiences and that they've had in nature-based solution financing, we can use here in the African continent as well, and vice versa. So I think that there's a lot to come out of this collaboration and over the next months. Thank you again for joining, and we look forward to seeing you next time in April. And thank you to our speakers. Thank you so much for joining and all your valuable contributions.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.